They tried to force me to join the HOA, and I agreed, but not in the way they expected. This is a story about a property I own and rent out. It may sound strange, but I think I wouldn't be able to afford to live there now. The area has become quite elite. The story takes place not in the USA, but in South Africa. However, for your convenience, I've converted all amounts from the local currency to US dollars. So let's begin. Many years ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm had been divided, but before construction began in the surrounding area. The plot I purchased was near the back entrance, which opened onto a dirt road. The more expensive lots were closer to the paved road at the front. Initially, I bought a large piece of land with the intention of farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some landowners organized, let's call them the Organized Owners, or OOs, and managed to have the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to pave roads, supply water, and provide electricity if a certain percentage of landowners developed their plots. A construction company associated with the organized owners offered those who had land but no buildings to build houses at a very favorable price, provided they gathered enough signatories. At the same time, one of the O's offered to buy half of my plot. I agreed, and the money from the sale, about 4 times what I had paid for the entire plot 10 years ago, along with a small bank loan, allowed me to pay for the construction of a house, which turned out to be quite large and beautiful. I lived in the house for several years, and my mother moved in with me. I decided to subdivide the plot again and build her a house next to mine. Unfortunately, an undiagnosed tumor took her life before construction began. The tumor was diagnosed too late to do anything about it. Shortly after her death, we moved out of the house and began renting it out. About a few weeks before our move, the O to whom I sold the land began discussing the creation of an HOA. I wasn't interested and left. Approximately 2 years later, a neighbor from the O's contacted me. Now, in this area, there were 2 roads. The old paved road located near the former farmer's house, which connected to the busy main road, and my back entrance, which had now become a paved entrance with a wide but not too busy municipal road. The HOA tried to close the old farmer's road to improve safety and reduce transit traffic. They wanted the road near my property to become the main and, in fact, the only entrance. They began pressuring me to join them. I firmly said no. Eventually, they accepted this but said they wanted to install a welcome sign for people in the area in the only convenient place, the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a small guardhouse to constantly monitor who enters and exits, and they planned to place it on my land. We agreed that they would maintain the lawn and pay me about $35 a month in exchange for the land they needed. I was very pleased with this deal since the plot was not small, and it cost them nothing, as they already had a permanent gardening service for the HOA's needs. This was over 10 years ago. In the end, they succeeded in closing the other road, and now the HOA pays for security next to my property, also mows my lawn, and pays me a sum that is enough to occasionally order takeout from a cafe for the whole family a couple of times. Sometimes, someone from the HOA contacts me to persuade me to join, but I'm completely uninterested. My property has been rented to the same tenant all these years, and everything is going well. About 3 years ago, problems started. Someone was scaring the tenant's young daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun near her window 3 or 4 times a month. This scared the tenant, and I assume it scared the HOA as well, as they and my tenant contacted me with a proposal. I would join the HOA but be exempt from following the rules and paying monthly fees. Additionally, they would build an electric fence with security cameras around the entire area. They said they had wanted to do this for a long time, but did not want to build a fence on land that wasn't part of the HOA. I saw no downsides and agreed. The dishonest dealings continued. The fence was built within a year, which was quite fast. Exactly 1 month after construction was completed, my tenant received a warning from the HOA about barking dogs. He informed them that although the property is part of the HOA, it is exempt from following the HOA's rules. The HOA responded that they had annulled these exemptions and gave him 30 days to fix everything. He contacted me, and I opened the mail I had been ignoring, assuming I didn't need to follow the rules or pay fees. I was in for a surprise. They had, retroactively, annulled the exemptions and demanded that I pay overdue fees for the past year, cancel the servitude agreement for using part of my land to install the guardhouse, return the money they had paid under it, pay for the gardener's services to mow my lawn, and pay fines for each violation that the tenant did not fix. A costly court process began involving lawyers, resulting in a judge ruling that the HOA's actions were mostly legal. They had the right to annul the exemptions, but were obligated to notify me 30 days in advance. When I was walking to my car, a neighbor from the OOs, who was the HOA chairman and the one who bought half of my plot many years ago, told me that I was foolish for not joining the HOA from the start, as I could have been a founder, whatever that meant. He also said that next time I should read the documents more carefully before signing, implying malicious intent in reading the contract. I was also interested in what it meant to be a founder. Spoiler: nothing. Returning home, I took the HOA contract and began studying it, intending to violate every rule if I found a loophole. Beyond the first page, I didn't get anywhere. The HOA identified my property by address, but in reality, the land had a unique cadastral number used for legal purposes. When my mother moved in with me, I divided my plot into two, one for me, the other for her, but I never started construction on her plot. When I signed the agreement many years ago, granting the HOA the right to use part of my land, it was specifically that small plot for my mother. When the HOA formalized the agreement, they simply took the number of that small plot without realizing it was only part of my land. It turns out that my main plot was not legally part of the HOA. The next day, the OO neighbor brought 2 documents, and I signed for their receipt. One notified that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and the other was about annulling the servitude in 30 days. I think he had some malicious intent because I lived an hour's drive from the property, but he brought the documents himself. Exactly 30 days later, I knocked on the HOA chairman neighbor's door and handed him the 2 documents. The first stated that I planned to build a house on the plot within the HOA, which puzzled him, and the second stated that they had 30 days to remove the guardhouse, partial barriers, and the sign from my property. He tried to start a conversation, but I ignored him, got into my car, and left. The next morning, the HOA's lawyer called me, explaining that all their structures would remain on my property since they were on unused land. I said that I was building a house, and the land would no longer be unused. I heard him smirk, saying that the court would not accept my construction as legal. I hope he also heard my smirk when I said that on this plot, there's currently no house, and there's barely enough space to build a small house. I told him to check the cadastral number, of course, to which they eventually realized that my plot was essentially 2 different plots. It took them 5 days to contact me again. Their lawyer said that the terms of the servitude do not allow me to cancel it without their permission, and I sent him a photo of their own servitude annulment document. On the same day, the neighbor invited me to lunch on his account to discuss the problem, and I declined. 2 days later, he repeated the invitation, and I refused again. Other OOs also started contacting me, some aggressively, some sympathetically. I responded to all with, "No, thank you." 9 days before the 30-day deadline, another lawyer called me with a proposal to surrender. In his words, I agreed to meet. I already had the documents prepared, and the meeting went quickly. I handed over the documents, and the lawyer read them. My new servitude proposal included everything from the previous agreement, but now the HOA was obligated to bring the plot up to the HOA's standards and maintain it since it had become part of the HOA. The cost of the servitude increased to $500 a month instead of $35, and it would increase with inflation. If I canceled the agreement, the HOA was obliged to pay me $7,500 in compensation, and the last clause stated that the contract would automatically terminate after 30 days if any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or my property. Complaints would be filed against my property, and any legal proceedings against the property would be initiated. It was only about the small plot. The lawyer was dissatisfied, saying it was an unfair proposal, but would pass it to the HOA chairman. I reminded him that in 8 days, I would send a team of workers with construction tools to dismantle everything remaining on my land. Later that evening, the angry HOA chairman called me, saying he would never sign the new agreement. I replied, "Oh." He tried to lower the rent amount to the level of the old agreement, to which I pointed out that when I signed the previous agreement, the area was not yet developed and there were other roads leading to it. But now only my road remained, and the plot was fully developed. He said they were forcing me to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I responded that they were free not to sign it. In the end, he said that a lawyer would contact me the next morning. The lawyer called me and asked me to come sign the agreement. When I arrived, it turned out that the lawyer was just a couple of lawyers, legal assistants without degrees, who couldn't even appear in court. He handed me the agreement, and I said I needed to read it first to ensure nothing had changed. A couple of seconds later, the lawyer laughed, saying, "Of course, I read the agreement, no changes." The HOA chairman signed it, and a couple of lawyers signed as witnesses. I was surprised why he signed it, because it was so foolish. The couple of lawyers replied. I started telling him it was a bad idea, but he said he doesn't get paid for thoughts or advice, and ordered me to shut up. So I shut up. I asked, "Do you understand what he signed?" He nodded. I suggested giving the documents to lawyers for review, but he said they had already issued too many bills. So he would just sign it and then sue me when their servitude was saved. This happened about a year and a half ago. 6 months later, the HOA realized the trap they had fallen into. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained that they couldn't win even if the court sided with them. The most they could achieve was annulling the servitude agreement, but it was unlikely that the court would side with them. The lawyers particularly emphasized that the HOA could not maintain a clause where the HOA pays my legal expenses in any lawsuit against me, as the agreement did not state that it only concerned HOA matters. This meant that the HOA had to pay my expenses if anyone initiated legal proceedings against me. They argued that the court likely would not support this clause since the agreement concerned the HOA, but I said I was ready to find out because the HOA itself would sue me if it decided to challenge this clause. In the end, I signed an amendment to the agreement, stating that if the HOA chairman resigned or left the HOA altogether, he would still be personally obligated to pay all my legal expenses. And if the HOA itself sued me, it would cover all the expenses. The HOA chairman resigned at the first meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he shouldn't sign documents without understanding them, and he was clearly upset. During negotiations with a neutral mediator, it was revealed that without the ability to control access to the area through the guardhouse, which was partially on my land, the HOA would violate its own bylaws and be dissolved. I also learned, though it should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired, and all the wires led to the guardhouse. So, essentially, The existence of the HOA depended on my decision. Recently, I built a small dog pool for the neighborhood. I did it myself, dug a hole, laid stones, and poured concrete. It was my first attempt, and to be honest, the result looks terrible. The HOA held a meeting where they said that this pool spoils the view of the neighborhood. I asked them to make a list of what needed to be fixed and how to present it at the next meeting. The list was long. They essentially required a complete reconstruction of the pool. I asked if there was any way to reduce the costs of bringing it up to HOA standards, and they replied that it was not possible. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to maintain the plot according to HOA standards, specifically highlighting this clause, and handed them the list. I said that the HOA usually prefers to resolve such issues within 30 days. They began arguing until the mediator reminded them that they couldn't force me to comply without breaking the servitude. They said they would comply. Today, I learned a lot of new information about the old neighbor. It turned out that he sold his property 3 months ago and is moving to Australia. I learned that the HOA successfully sued him for a huge sum of money they lost due to his management, within the framework of his enmity against me. It turned out that he had a grudge against me. I have no idea what I did to offend him. I'm not sure I'll continue to complicate the HOA's life. The only thing keeping them from terminating the agreement is the enormous financial losses they would incur if they did, and I like the monthly payments. So, I'm motivated to behave well. In the end, the old neighbor was right. It's really not worth signing documents if you don't understand what you're signing. Well, make sure to write what you think about this whole story in the comments. I understand that the story is certainly extremely complicated, but I hope you grasp the essence. I would love to know what you think about this story. Were the right decisions made? Would you have done something differently? Feel free to leave your comment. Everyone has different vision, and it is fun to see how others interpret the events. If you have ever been in a similar situation, you are welcome to share your story as well. Sometimes, it helps to express your thoughts and feelings. And hey, if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. Please stay safe and remember that life finds a way to carry on.